Today, we're going to make this circle-shaped sci-fi button. Let's go. All right, so if we take a look at this button, it has 5 major components. It has 3 ring elements. It has an icon in the center, and then it has this nice gradient background. Today, we're going to be making this player icon at the center, and then next week, we'll make the other 4 elements and finish it up. We're going to be using a lot of subgraphs in the process. These are nodes that we've created in previous episodes. I've put links to all of the subgraphs down in the description. So if I start using a node that you haven't seen before, look down in the description for the link to the video on how to create it. We'll start out in Unity today, and then we'll switch over to Unreal in a minute to make the button there as well. All right, so let's start by making the subgraph that creates the player icon. We'll come down here to our procedural library and select the patterns folder. And I'll just right click here and pick create shader graph subgraph. And we're going to call this player icon. All right, the player icon has 2 elements. It has a circle, and it has for the head, and it has kind of a pill shape for the shoulders. So let's start out by making a circle. And there's our circle element. And then for the shoulders, we can make a rectangle. So there is our rectangle SDF node. And in order to make it sort of that pill shape, what we can do here is I'm going to set the size to 0.9, 0.5. And then for the corner radii, I'm going to set all of these to 0.5. And that's going to go ahead and round off the corners. So now we have a nice pill shape instead of a rectangle with hard corners. So now we need to combine these together, but there's a couple other things that we need to do as well. We need to move each of these down or position these so that they're in the correct location. Right now, they're both just right in the center. So to move this circle, oh, you know what? We need to go ahead and add some UV coordinate inputs here. So I'm just going to follow our standard procedure for adding an input port that brings in our UV coordinates. So I'll add our UVs. I'll add our branch on input connection node and connect up our UVs with that. And then we'll just add a UV node here to act as default in case there's nothing connected to the UV input port. So now we can take these UV coordinates, and I need to add 0 and negative 0.18. And those will be our UV coordinates for the circle. So that's going to move our circle up to the top where the head goes. And then I'm going to copy this add, and we're going to move our rectangle down. So I'm going to set this one to 0 and 0.38 and connect that up. And that's moved our rectangle down so that it can become the shoulders. And the last thing that we need to do is mask off the bottom here so that instead of a full pill shape, we just have kind of half of a pill shape. And in order to do that, I need to make another rectangle. So I'll just add another rectangle SDF node. And again, I'll just repeat this. These nodes, the circle and the rectangle, are nodes that we've created previously. So take a look down in the description for a link to the video where I show how to make those. All right, and for this last rectangle, we're also going to alter its UV coordinates, and we're going to make it a value of 0.55 to move that rectangle down to the bottom. And then I also need to adjust the size. So I'm going to set this rectangle to a value of 1 and 0.2 because this is just a mask that we're going to use to chop off the bottom of our pill shape here. Okay, so I have an SDF. Let's just drag out a preview so that you can see what this looks like. This is the sign distance field for the shoulders of the player icon. And then we also have a sign distance field for this mask. And we need to combine these two together. And what we really want to do is subtract this sign distance field of our rectangle here from the sign distance field of our pill shape. And let's take a look at the nodes that we've created so far. So under procedural, we have SDFs, and then we have operators. And there we have this SDF unite node. So I can take two SDFs like this one and unite them together. But that's not what I want. I actually want to subtract them. So I need to create a new SDF operator. And so what I'm going to do is come over here to my SDFs operators folder. And there's my SDFs unite. And I'm going to make a new SDF subtract subgraph. And it's very similar to SDF unite. And so I'm just going to clone SDF unite. And I'm going to rename this new one to SDF subtract. Now, if you haven't created SDF unite, again, down in the description, there's a link to the video that shows how to do that. Okay, so let's open up our new SDF subtract node. And remember, this is a duplicate of SDF unite. And so we need to make a couple of adjustments here just to make sure that the new node is doing what we want. So the first thing that we're going to do is skip this add here. We'll just wire our UV coordinates directly into our circle. And for this add, we're going to set it to negative 0.2 and negative 0.2. So we're just adjusting the positions of our circles. And these are just like the default values. So the changes that I'm making right here don't matter too much, but let's go ahead and make them. So we're going to set this top circle to a value of 0.5. And we're going to set this bottom circle to a size value of 0.3. And that'll give us some good previews for what the subtract operation looks like. All right, so let's come over here. And we have our two SDFs coming in. And we have a minimum here. And we need to change this to be maximum because we want to find whichever is greater in the case of a subtract instead of whichever is lesser. So I'm going to wire up this maximum instead of this minimum. So that is what will give us a subtract. Now we have two output operators here. One is precise, and that one is complete with the addition of our maximum here. And then the other one is smooth. Oh, you know what? There is one thing that I forgot. I need to take the value coming out of our second SDF and negate it. So I'm going to add a negate node here. And then we're going to wire the result of that negate into both the maximum and also the B value of our lerp. And this lerp over here needs its A value to come from our first SDF instead of our second. So it used to be that A came from our second and B came from our first, but we've swapped that around now. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is I have a subtract node here and an add node here. And I actually need to reverse these operations. So I'm going to create an add and wire our two SDFs into the add. Then we'll wire that into our multiply. And now instead of the add here, we're going to create a subtract. And we're going to subtract 0.5 from the value that we're passing in. And there we go. And then I think this is the last thing that we need to do, but we need to add an add node here at the end instead of a subtract. And we're going to wire the results of everything into that. And so now we have our subtract operation, and that all looks correct. So I'll go ahead and wire that in And there's our last change. So now this node is doing a subtract operation on our sign distance fields instead of an add. So let's go ahead and save it. And we'll jump back into the player icon that we're creating. So here we have our SDF unite. And instead of uniting these two SDFs, what we're going to do is use that SDF subtract node that we just created. So if we take a look at these side by side, this one is adding the SDFs together, and this one is subtracting one SDF from the other one. So we're going to wire our rectangles into this. And now what you're going to see is that we've subtracted this bottom piece down here so that we're able to create that nice shoulder shape. Okay, so we've got a shape that's a combination between our rectangle here and our mask here down at the bottom. And then the next thing that we need to do is unite our head SDF with our shoulders SDF. So let's take this SDF here and come over to Procedurals, SDFs, Operators, and we're going to pick Unite SDF1. And then we're also going to plug in the result of our subtracted SDF here so that now we have that's starting to look like a player icon. So we have a combination of our head and our shoulders. So for the values that we're going to pass out, let's go ahead and set this to be our SDF, and we're going to set it to be a float value, and we can pass out this as our SDF. And then we also need to add a fill value. So we'll add a new output here, and we'll call it fill. And what we need to do now is take the SDF of our player icon and resolve it. And so I'm going to wire this out and add an anti-aliasing node. And we're going to set the cutoff to be 0. And there's our nice player icon. And then all we need to do is set our result to be 1 minus. And we get the result that we're looking for. That's fantastic. So we can just wire the result of this out to our fill output. Okay, so we've created a subgraph here that generates a player icon, and it generates both the SDF of the player icon and the resolved shape of the player icon. So now we can use this for all kinds of things. And in our case, we're going to put it right in the center of our button. So let's go ahead and do the last couple of things here. We need to set this to procedural / patterns so that we can find it in our create node menu. And we also need to set our graph settings so that the preview is 2D. And we'll save this. And now we'll jump back to our interface here. And I'm going to come up here to shaders. And I'm just going to go ahead and make the shader that we're going to finish up next week. So I'm going to pick create shader graph subgraph. And I'm going to call this sci-fi circle button. And we'll go ahead and open it up. And now we can come into procedural patterns, player icon. And there's the player icon that we're going to use as the center for the circular sci-fi button that we're going to make. Okay, so next week we're going to go ahead and make the rest of the button. We'll add the circles around the player icon and animate them and all that good stuff. And it's going to be super fun. So be sure to come back next week and we'll go over that process. All right, let's switch over to Unreal and I'll show you how to make the player icon in that game engine as well. All right, here we are in Unreal, and we're going to start making our circular sci-fi button. And the first element that we need is the player icon that goes in the center of the button. So we're going to make a material function that allows us to create that little procedural player icon. So I'm going to right click here in our shaders procedural patterns folder. I'm going to right click in here and select material material function, and I'm going to call this item player icon, and we'll open this up. All right, so the player icon consists of two different main elements. It has the head and it has the shoulders. So for the head, let's just go ahead and bring in our SDF circle. And for the shoulders, we're going to need an SDF rectangle. And for both of these shapes, we're going to need UV coordinates. So let's bring in a texture coordinate node, and we're going to make an input for our material function. So we'll add a function input, and we'll select this, and we'll set it to be a vector 2. And we'll call it UVs, and we'll check this use preview value as default, and then connect up our texture coordinates to our UV coordinates. Let's give ourselves a preview window here so that we can see what our results are going to look like. And I like my preview window to be set to a field of view of 50. Just because I think it's a little bit easier to see. And I'm also going to turn unlit. I'm going to turn the lighting off so that our results are a little bit better here. Okay, so let's go ahead and wire our UV coordinates into our circle and our rectangle. And we'll go ahead and wire our circle node out to our preview just for now so that we can see what our results look like. All right, that's a pretty good start for our head, but we want to move it up to the top so that we have room to add our shoulders down here at the bottom. And so in order to do that, I'm just going to add an add node here, and we're going to add a value to our UV coordinates. Oh, I've added a value of 1, so it just moved off. Let's go ahead and add a value of 0.18. And that's actually added it to both U and V. And we only want to add it to one of those. So let's leave the U 0, and we'll set the Y or the V to 0.18. There we go. So now we've got the head at the top of our icon, and we want to add some shoulders down here at the bottom. So I'm just going to clone these two nodes here, and we'll wire up our UV coordinates. These are the UVs that we're going to use for a rectangle. And for that, we need to subtract a value. So I'm just going to set this to negative 0.38. And that's going to move our rectangle down. So if we wire this into our output result, now you can see we've got a rectangle down here at the bottom. But instead of a rectangle, we actually want to round this off so it looks a little bit more like shoulders. So for the size parameter, I'm going to connect this up, and I'm going to set the size to 0.9 and 0.5. And then for our corner radii, we're going to set these to 0.5. So right now you can see our rectangle looks like a squared off box. But if I set our corner radii to 0.5, now we've rounded these off. And now I can take these two values, our fill from our circle and our fill from our rectangle, and I can add them together. And now you can see we've got our nice little player icon. But there are some improvements that I want to make. First of all, there's this area down here at the bottom, and we want to mask this off so there's kind of like this hard edge that cuts off the shoulders instead of having the whole pill shape go all the way off the edge. We want a nice black border around the outside of our icon. And so we need to make a mask that hides this bottom portion of our pill shape. And then the other thing that we need to do is, instead of using the fill values for our circle and our rectangle, I want to use the SDF values so that we can play with the shapes later on. And what this is going to do is it's going to make this material function a little bit more useful. Because we're exporting SDFs, it's going to allow us to manipulate that data in a lot of unique ways that we wouldn't have if we were just using the pill shapes. So let's go ahead and create our mask down here. I'm going to clone our rectangle SDF node. And this node here is going to be the mask down at the bottom. So the first thing that we need to do is give ourselves some UV coordinates for this. So I'm just going to clone these two nodes again. And this time, instead of subtracting negative 0.38, we're going to subtract negative 0.55. So we'll plug in our UV coordinates and then connect that up to this rectangle. And now if we preview this rectangle, you can see that it's just going to be down here at the bottom. And then for the size, we're going to set our size to a value of 1 and a value of 0.2. And I'll connect this up to the size of our input rectangle there. So now what you can see is we've created this shape that just hangs out here down at the very edge. And then this is going to be a mask that we use to mask off our shoulders pill shape that we've created. So we have the SDF coming out of here, which looks like this. It's a sine distance field gradient. And we have the SDF coming out of here, which looks like this. And what we want to do is subtract this SDF from this one here. And let's go ahead and take a look at our at the nodes that we've created so far. So if we come down here to our procedural pattern, and here's our SDF unite. So this is a node that's made to join two SDFs together. This isn't quite what we want though. We want an SDF subtract, and we haven't created that one. So we need to go ahead and create a new SDF operator that instead of unite, it's going to subtract. And then we can connect this SDF up to it and this SDF up to it so that we're subtracting our rectangle mask from this shoulder shape that we created. So let's go ahead and open our content drawer. We'll come down here to SDF operators, and I'm just going to copy and paste our SDF unite, and we'll rename it to SDF subtract. So now we can open this material function up and make all the changes that are required in order to make our subtraction operator. Okay, so we've got a few math nodes here that are doing the unite operation, and we want to switch these over to doing a subtract operation. So we're going to switch this min node out here for a max node. So we'll connect up SDF1 and SDF2 to the max node and then plug that out as precise. And then the other thing that we need to do is swap these operations. Let's see. We want to make our SDF1 plug into the A of our lerp, and our SDF2 plug into the B of our lerp. And then we also want to change this node here to an add, and we want to change this node here to a subtract. So I'm going to create an add node here. We'll add SDF1 and SDF2 together. Then we'll multiply by 0.5, divide by our input blend, and then this needs to be a subtract. So we're going to add our subtract node in here, and we want our A value to be 0.5 subtracted from the result of our divide and then passed into the saturate. All right, and then the very last thing that we need to do is instead of a subtract right here, we need to change this node to an add. So we're going to wire the result of the lerp and the result of the multiply here, and then we're going to replace this subtract node with our add node. And now we have a node that does an SDF subtract instead of an SDF unite. Okay, now there's one last node that we need to put into our graph here, into our SDF subtract operation to make it work correctly. We need to multiply our SDF2 by a -1. So I'm going to add a multiply node here and set the B to -1. And then I'm going to wire this SDF2 value into that. And I'm going to connect it up to the maximum. And I'm also going to connect it up to the lerp so that our output of our SDF2 is negative instead of positive. And that's kind of the key to the whole subtraction operation. So let's go ahead and save our SDF subtract. We need to come over here to our details panel, and we need to set this up so that our SDF subtract node shows up in the right location. So we'll set this to procedural SDF and save it. And now let's just double check. We're going to come down here to the procedural folder and check in SDF, and there it is, SDF subtract. And now we're ready to subtract our shoulders rounded pill shape from the mask down at the bottom. So we'll come down here to procedural SDF, and now you can see we have our SDF unite and our SDF subtract. And I'm going to subtract this rectangle mask SDF from our shoulders shape there. So now when I plug this into our output, now you can see we have a nice shoulder shape SDF, and our bottom portion here is masked out. That's exactly what we're looking for. Okay, so we've combined our shoulder shape with a mask. Now we need to combine our circle shape as well. And to do that, we're going to use the SDF unite operation. So we're going to unite the circle shape SDF with the shoulder shape SDF. And let's take a look at what we get now. All right, that's cool. So now we have the SDF of the circle combined with the SDF of the shoulders. So we're ready to output this. And we can take this output that's called result, and instead we're going to call it the SDF because this is the signed distance field of our player icon. Now we also want to create another output that is just the fill shape. So I'm going to call this one fill, and we're going to take the output here and we need to convert it from an SDF into a regular shape. And that's something that I like to call resolving. We need to resolve it into a shape. And so for this, we're going to add our anti-aliasing node that we've created in a previous video. And let's take a look at what this one looks like. So you can see it's not quite what we're looking for yet. We need to set this cutoff value here. I think we need to set it to 0. Let's just take a look. Yeah, there we go. Now we're getting the right shape. And just for a final touch, we want to invert this. So we're going to add a 1- node there. And now we can pass the result of this out as our fill. Great. Let's just set our fill shape so that it shows up first. We're going to set its sort priority to 0. And our SDF, we're going to set that one to a sort priority of 1. And now we're all set. We've created our player icon. Let's just verify that we've set up the last couple of items. We want to check this exposed to library. So our player icon material function is available in the library. And then we also want to set it to procedural SDF. So now we can save this. And let's open up our content drawer again. And we'll open up our shaders folder. And let's go ahead and create a new material function. This one's going to be our circular sci-fi button. So we'll come down here to material and create a material function. And let's just call this circle sci-fi button. And we can open it up. And now we can open up our menu and come down here to our procedural folder. Whoops, I made a mistake. Instead of procedural SDF, this should be procedural patterns. And so now we can open up our menu and come down here under procedural and under patterns. And there's our player icon material function. Cool, so now we can just wire this in And now you can see we've got our nice player icon there. All right, so next week we're going to fill in the rest of our circular button. We're going to create all those elements around the outside and the nice gradient background. And it's going to be great. So come back next week to see the exciting conclusion of our circular sci-fi button. All right, that's it for today. Have a great week, everybody.